Hello and welcome back to Fame Under Fire from BBC Sounds with me, Anushka Matanda-Doughty. As it's one of the biggest stories of our time, it's no surprise that we're picking up where we left off last week with the Epstein files. Now, for those of you who've sent in questions about the Macron case, the Blake Lively case, we haven't forgotten you, but the sheer volume of questions about Epstein meant that we're just going to dedicate this episode to that. Now, we have to remember, those files detail a huge investigation into the late Jeffery Epstein, who sexually abused dozens of young women and girls. And of course, the survivors must remain at the centre of all of this. Now, we asked you what questions you had that you weren't seeing in the mainstream media, and you sent them in. This is a bit of a different episode. It's just me and you today. I'm without Sean. He's in court defending in a quadruple murder trial. But later on, I am speaking to Arick Fudali from the Bloom Law Firm, and he's going to give us an update on what is going on with some of the survivors. But today, first of all, we're covering everything from cannibalism to references of torture to mentions of babies. Is all that actually in there, and what more do we know? This is a Jeffery Epstein fact or fiction from Fame Under Fire. But before we jump in, three things. First of all, a warning. Some of our viewers, if you're with us on YouTube, or listeners, might find some of this content distressing. Second of all, we have to remember from last week, just because somebody's name appears in the Epstein files, it's not an indication of any wrongdoing. And third of all, you might hear me say things like, this email appears to be from so-and-so. That's because even though they might be named as the sender, they could come out and say, well, actually, it was somebody else on my account. And sometimes it's just not clear who sent it. But I'm going to jump straight in. I've got senior producer Jim in the gallery. Jim, what's the first question?
Are the emails about torture true?
Yeah, and I know what emails that is referring to. I've seen them all over TikTok.
Where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video. That is an email sent to somebody that has been redacted.
And yes, they are in the files. This is a direct quote. This is an email from Epstein, which is redacted, so we don't know who it was sent to. It was sent on the 24th of April, 2009. It says, where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video. That's EFTA00663685 for anybody who wants to look for themselves. Another one written by Epstein, we're not sure who to, again, says, quote, do you want me to try to do her, ... or just torture her? Now, those emails are in there. The screenshots you've seen on social media are real. But what do we actually know outside of this? We can't see in the files if the FBI have actually investigated him for torture, if they followed these emails up and found it was something benign, or if something criminal was going on. Can we glean anything from the federal indictment? Now, reminder, a federal indictment is a lawsuit that lists charges, their allegations made by the federal government. Now, the actual crime of torture doesn't exist as a statute in US law, so it can't be prosecuted under the banner of torture. But what we might think of as torture is prosecuted as other crimes. Think assault, battery, locking someone in a room, so false imprisonment. Those all can come under the headline of torture that a prosecutor might say happened in court, but they'll actually exist in the indictment as other crimes. When you get to sentencing, there's something else that can happen. The prosecutor can include torture as an enhancement. We've spoken about that before on this podcast. It's basically where they say, judge, Mr. So-and-so is a sex trafficker, but the method through which he coerced his victims was torture, so therefore he should get even more time on added at sentencing. However, none of this is alleged in Epstein's indictment. But I want to make a really clear distinction here because I've seen some of this stuff on social media. If you keyword search torture in the Epstein files, it's going to come up a lot of times. It comes up 518 times. By no means are all these references similar to the ones I just read out from the emails that are in there. It says things like, quote, I don't mean to torture you, but can you please sign this contract? So if everybody's saying all 518 mentions are about him saying things similar to what we just said, that's not true. There are other messages where references to torture imagery appear to be dropped into what seems like casual conversation. For instance, in this one, reference EFTA02640135, it says, this is a direct quote from the email, number 1, Madonna on the way. Number 2, instead of torture photo, maybe portrait of me instead. Number 3, presentation of Trumpville. Those messages are sent to the artist Andres Serrano, who produced a series called Torture. Now, you can Google that online and see what it looks like. He's known for creating some provocative works. Epstein was also going to him to get his portrait done by him. And so we can see this email seems to be organising what art Epstein would be buying from Serrano. And the reference to a torture photo could be about Serrano's work. Once again, there is no other information provided on this email chain. But it must be noted, those are not the only mentions of the artist Andres Serrano in the files. He's in the files multiple times, and at one point Epstein says to him, quote, "I hope you are enjoying our girl." That's EFTA01005609 if you want to go and look at that. Of course, as we always do, we asked Andres Serrano about his relationship with Epstein and what these messages mean. And we got a response from his wife, whose words are spoken by one of our colleagues. She said this.
Andre's relationship with Epstein was mostly based on Andre's desire over years to acquire an antique statue Epstein had. Andres told this story in press a few times.
Now, she's included in the email a link to a Vanity Fair article where he does talk about this. She said the reference to the torture picture is a reference to Serrano's series titled Torture in all caps 2015. On the message about enjoying, quote, our girl, she said,
"This Andres doesn't remember at all. Most of the emails are lost on our side due to several computer crashes and updates."
So I sent her a screenshot of the email that the, quote, our girl reference was from, and she responded with this.
Epstein's perverted sense of humour refers to a Madonna statue that Andres got from Epstein.
Again, let's be absolutely clear, an inclusion of somebody's names in the Epstein files is not an indication of any wrongdoing. But yes, there are references to torture in the Epstein files, and those screenshots you've seen flying around, well, they are real. But like I said before, we have no extra information from the FBI as to if they looked into this, if they investigated this. That's not in there at all. So the next question we got sent in a lot was this one.
Is there a photo of Jeffrey Epstein with Kuru disease?
Now, if you don't know what Kuru disease is, I don't blame you. It's a rare neurodegenerative disease that occurred primarily in the Papua New Guinea highlands due to ritualistic cannibalism. That was part of a burial rite. This claim, oh my gosh, I've seen this everywhere, absolutely taken off on social media, particularly on TikTok. Videos viewed millions and millions of times, and it's a falsity wrapped in a real exhibit from the Epstein files. Let me play you one of those videos.
I've had the displeasure of coming across this picture and video in the files, and it has brought to the forefront of my brain a story that my dad used to tell me all the time when I was a kid, and I didn't think would ever actually be relevant, but here we are. Back in the day, my dad used to tell me about his friend who had a daughter who was a little bit...
So the photo that they're talking about, that is real. If you're with us on YouTube, this is what it looks like. I'll describe it. It's Jeffrey Epstein with a swollen side of his face down to his lip. That's actually in the exhibits, but he does not. And let me categorically say, he does not have Kuru disease. That disease is fatal. No cure, you can't survive it. You lose your ability to walk, to sit up unassisted, to be able to eat. You have slurred speech, and you are dead within 12 months. Jeffrey Epstein was giving interviews and writing letters in jail. His death was not caused by Kuru disease. The official cause of his death remains a, quote, suicide by hanging, according to the New York Medical Examiner in August 2019. Now, I just played you that clip about Kuru disease. Let me play you another one.
I've had the displeasure of coming across this picture and video in the files, and it has brought to the forefront of my brain a story that my dad used to tell me all the time when I was a kid, and I didn't think would ever actually be relevant. But here we are back in the day. My dad used to tell me about his friend who had a daughter who was a little bit older than me.
Notice they're saying exactly the same thing in the video, word for word. But when you look at it, it looks like two separate people. One is an African-American girl, one's a Caucasian girl. But if you look in the corner of the video, it says AI-generated media. So not only has this false claim taken off on TikTok, it's actually being pushed out by AI-generated content creators. Now, I will say another email that is doing the rounds is where somebody asks Epstein if he isn't feeling very well. It says, quote, "Did you eat something bad?" Now, I'm quoting this directly. "Is that what it?" And we think she means, "Is that what it is?" And he responds saying, quote, "Thank you for your concern, comma, not food, people." Now, that is the screenshot that's going around social media, and it's real, it is. But that's not the entirety of the email chain. The person responds to Jeffrey Epstein by sending a picture of a sleeping tiger, the tiger surrounded by sleeping pigs that are dressed as tigers. And Epstein responds to that image saying, quote, "Predator on the outside, gentle on the inside, the opposite of what I have to deal with." Once again, I'm just giving you a fuller picture of what's in the email chain. What's our next question?
Is there a reference to killing babies and murdering innocent children in the files?
Yeah, I've seen this question a lot. This conversation online appears to have come from this email exchange. It's an email which appears to be from Sarah K. It's FTA00563164 if anybody wants to look. Sarah K was one of Jeffrey Epstein's assistants. Here's what it says, quote, "Hi Rich, Jeffrey is asking if you can FedEx the painting he had made of the massacre of the innocents to the ranch. It's the large 9x9 canvas that we had rolled out for him to see in the entryway where they are killing babies. He wants to use it on the ranch and hoping you could FedEx it to arrive by Wednesday. Thanks, Sarah," close quote. So we're not quite sure who Rich is, but we do know about the reference to the massacre of the innocents. It's a reference to a painting. Now, there are several under the same name, one by Bruegel, for instance. Now, it depicts the scene in the Bible where, after hearing from the wise men of the birth of Jesus, King Herod ordered that all children in Bethlehem under the age of 2 be murdered. That's a real email, but they're talking about a painting. Let's move on to the next question.
People are saying he was trying to start a baby farm where he would impregnate women with genetically modified babies. Is that true?
Okay, so there are a series of emails with Brian Bishops. He's best known for his work in crypto, who, according to an article in the MIT Technology Review, was in 2019 working on a designer baby startup. The term designer baby's been around for a while. He didn't invent it. It means an infant whose genetic makeup has been altered or selected, so removing certain disease-causing genes or picking the eye color of the child. The emails from 2018 that appear to be between him and Epstein show Epstein agreeing to fund Bishop's designer baby startup. Reminder, this is after Epstein's conviction for child sex offences. It's EFTA010048001 if you want to take a look yourself. The quote is, "From Jeffrey Epstein, I have no problem with investing. The issue is if I'm seen to lead." Now, Bishop responds, assuring Epstein that he had always assumed there would be, quote, anonymity requirements about babies. He goes on saying, "We can't publicly identify who these are or their parents or benefactors. It would brand the child as essentially and sadly a freak for life in the media." Now, we contacted Brian Bishop for a comment and he said this.
"He didn't get involved and I never received money from him."
So that's what's in there about designer babies. Now, the claim that Epstein wanted to impregnate women himself actually comes from a 2019 report by the New York Times. They reported that during the early 2000s, Epstein had confided in a number of scientists and others about his plan to use his Zorro Ranch as a base in which women would be impregnated with his sperm and give birth to his babies. According to an article in The Guardian this week, several women say they were abused by Epstein on the ranch. The article says that the Attorney General of New Mexico said that his office had investigated Epstein's activity in New Mexico in 2019. We don't know to what extent the FBI also investigated. The Guardian report says that the emails released last week suggest there wasn't a search at the time of his arrest. So that's what we have on that. I think we've got time for one more question.
Hey, Fame Under Fire pod. I can't tell what's real and what isn't. TikTok says there are emails in there about getting infants to suckle on pacifiers harder. Please tell me that's not true.
That is true. That's an email sent by Mark Tramo, a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Now and at the time he sent it. He sent this to Epstein, quote, "Was just reading today that newborns will suck on a pacifier more vigorously if it triggers playback of a recording of her/his mother's voice than another woman's voice. Have you read David Brooks' Social Animal? Was #1 on New York Times books for quite a while." Now, at the time Mark Tramo sent this email to Epstein, Epstein was a registered child sex offender. There is no extra context given as to why he would send that. And that's not the only time Tramo appears in the files. Tramo also forwarded several 2010 messages he received from students seeking research guidance to Epstein, who responded to him, quote, "Are either of these cute?" And Tramo said back, quote, "We'll see, in brackets, you're terrible." That is EFTA00762250 if you want to take a look. Now, in a statement to UCLA's campus newspaper Daily Bruin, he initially denied discussing students in email exchanges, then later acknowledged some involvement, though he says the students mentioned were not from his classes and that he did not commit any crime or have any knowledge of Epstein's abuse. So those were some of our top asked questions on Epstein, and I want to thank you for sending them in, and please keep sending them. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Anushka_MD. But we have to remember with this story, at the heart of it always is the survivors and the victims. Now, earlier I spoke to Arick Fudali from the Bloom law firm. He represents 11 survivors, and he filled me in on an update in their fight for justice.
We've been scrutinizing everything the DOJ has been doing for decades, because it's important to remember that the DOJ, law enforcement, administration after administration has absolutely failed the survivors, going all the way back from the 90s. So in the 90s, of course, we've learned in the past, when these past few document dumps, that there was very credible reporting to the FBI about Jeffrey Epstein and what he was doing. And it appears from our research that the FBI didn't really do anything in response to very credible reporting, very credible complaint about Jeffrey Epstein's activities, which then resulted in allowed Jeffrey Epstein to continue to abuse throughout the 90s into the 2000s without really any scrutiny, any real investigation. And so they've been wronged every step of the way. There's been no justice for these victims despite their continued fight for decades. So we're looking into every avenue. We researched and actually even filed a lawsuit against the FBI. We're certainly at this point looking into potential lawsuits against the Department of Justice for how they've handled this document dump, for how they've handled the redactions.
But in filing that lawsuit against the DOJ, isn't their response, we're doing our best, we get this information, we're investigating what we can, and don't they technically have immunity from lawsuits?
That's the problem. So the United States government, not surprisingly, makes laws that makes it difficult to sue the United States government. There's no shock there. So yes, the FBI and most law enforcement agencies and federal entities and state entities as well have some sort of immunity in the United States where they're able to avoid lawsuits, avoid liability for these types of things. So, we unfortunately looks like what we're running into with this lawsuit that we filed recently.
So if the judge dismisses that lawsuit and similar lawsuits filed by other law firms, does it set a precedent that there's no real way for them to scrutinize the investigation that was done?
Unfortunately, I mean, that's certainly the message. That doesn't mean we're going to give up, though. And if you know anything about these or been following these Epstein survivors for, the last decade or so, you can see that they're not going to give up either.
And you say there about their committal to getting justice for their younger selves. And it has been astounding. And everybody who is watching this case has seen how they fought for years. A lot of the messages we're getting are from concerned citizens around the world, but particularly in the United States. And the number one question is, how do we support? How do we support the victims? What do they do?
These survivors continue to fight and continue to amplify their own voices to make sure, for instance, this law was passed. And now we're seeing, some accountability for some of the men in Jeffrey Epstein's circle. The other thing is call your congressman, call your representatives, email them.
There has been calls from members of the public who say, we've heard that survivors are willing and currently putting together a list of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged associates. Release the list. We believe you. We will believe what you say. It's one thing saying it, but doesn't that leave them in quite a vulnerable position?
It absolutely does. And unfortunately, a lot of powerful men typically like to use the courts as an offense or perhaps even as a strong defense. And what they do is they will sue for defamation. That's sort of the new trend for very high profile, defendants or accused is they will sue their accuser for defamation for making any statement, in the public about what they did. That creates a very difficult situation for the survivor who it does not have the financial resources and money to defend it. And it's not pleasant to be sued. As someone who represents a lot of survivors against accusers against very high profile individuals, I've been sued personally. My law firm has been sued. My clients have been sued. That's sort of the new tactic for high profile, wealthy, accused men is to sue their accuser and sort of do it like, the best defense is a good offense. So that's something they're up against.
In light of all of this and everything that's happened over the past couple of weeks, what does justice now look like for the survivors and the victims?
So justice looks like exactly like this. First is full disclosure. That is every single document in the possession of the Department of Justice disclosed, released to the public with zero redactions other than those that are necessary to hide the identity of the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. That's number one. The next is accountability. Holding these people who enabled, who facilitated, or perhaps even co-abused with Jeffrey Epstein, hold them accountable. Now that could look like that could be criminal accountability, criminal justice. That could be civil. That could just be societal accountability. Shaming these men who clearly were turning a blind eye or actually facilitating Jeffrey Epstein's abuse, or at worst, abusing along with Jeffrey Epstein. And then it's closure. So full disclosure, full transparency, full accountability and justice. And then once that's over, let these victims get peace. Let the survivors move on with their lives. But we can't get closure without accountability and justice. And we can't get accountability and justice until we get full transparency. So it has to be all three. It has to be in that order. But I think once the survivors get all three of those things, true transparency, true accountability, and then true closure, I think we can finally sort of rest and move forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Fame Under Fire with me, Anushka Matanda-Doughty. Make sure you subscribe to the BBC Sounds YouTube channel so you never miss a thing. And keep sending us those questions on TikTok and Instagram. It's Anushka_MD.